In the show today. Hello there, Senator.
Hey, Dan, how are you? It's great to be on your show.
Pretty good.
Thanks for the invitation.
Always glad to have you here whenever possible. How are you enjoying that hot seat you're on, by the way?
Hey, I love it. I love it. You know, when you're the senior senator from the state of Nevada, it's going to be a hot seat no matter who's sitting in it.
What's changed?
And it is.
What's changed for you now that you're in the senior, position after Harry Reid retired? It's changed a whole bunch of things, hasn't it?
Oh, yeah. You're in the middle of every fight, and clearly I am. I was asked recently by...
Especially lately, right?
And it's not going to end either. You know, we go from here to tax reform, and I'm on the finance committee, and I'll be in the middle of that battle. We'll go to banking reform. I sit on the banking committee. I'll be in the middle of that fight, but I got to look and determine what's best for the state of Nevada and represent the state of Nevada when I'm back in Washington, D.C.
Banking reform is something that with all this other stuff going on, doesn't get a lot of discussion. I know Dodd-Frank's been talking about.
Correct.
There are some things that need to happen in that arena, aren't there?
There are a lot of discussions. The chairman and I get along quite well. We're discussing some of the changes that need to occur. We need to get some capital into the system. We can do that through tax reform. We can do that through banking reform. We do this right, we're going to see some real growth in this country.
Tax reform going to be an easier fight than health care? I've heard from a lot of people they think you got a better chance here on this one.
Here's the upside. We were not in agreement on health care. The House had their plan, Senate had their plan, White House had their plan. We're going into tax reform, at least agreement and concept of what we're trying to do here with lower rates and look at some of the deductions, take a look at our foreign tax system and all that. So if we go to a territorial tax system, try to get this capital back into the United States, everybody can agree on that. So hopefully by the end of the year, we'll have a tax reform that we can talk about.
The economy right this moment doing pretty well. The stock market's going crazy, obviously.
It is.
If you get good tax reform done, is that going to accelerate the economy even more, do you think?
Well, let me share something. I was in Secretary Mnuchin's office, the Treasury Secretary's office.
I like him a lot.
There was a sign on his, a picture on his wall. It was an article by the Wall Street Journal that was signed by President Trump, and what it said is GDP plus 5%. So you know where the president is.
That's
plus
where he
5%.
wants to go, yeah.
So Mnuchin put that article in front of his desk so he'd look at it every single day. Now, if we can get over 3%, keep in mind it's been below 2% for the last 10 years on average. I think it's been about 1.9%.
A lot of people don't think we can do 3 again.
I believe we can, and I believe we can through structuring this tax. And by the way, we know no Democrat's going to support us on this. They came out with their bullet points, and they said we're all for comprehensive tax reform as long as you don't lower rates. Yeah. So that's where the left is coming from.
As usual, they'll talk as long as you give them everything they want to begin with, right?
But we'll get this done. It may take a couple of months, and it's going to be ugly. You know, the healthcare process wasn't friendly, and as they say, it's like making sausage, and we're going to do the same thing with the tax reform. But at the end of the day, we'll have a product that we can talk about as a Republican Party.
So that hot seat you're on, you were one of the ones being pointed at as you were going to make the decision. But John McCain kind of jumped in there.
Well,
but you were. What's changed? I want to ask you from 2015 when everybody was on board with repeal. What changed between now and then that's just in your mind not the way to go anymore?
The 2015 bill?
Yeah.
A couple of things. One is we have several 100,000 people now that are on expanded Medicaid that weren't back in 2015.
Yeah.
We're talking about getting rid of health care with repeal only for 400,000 Nevadans. Now, that's not, to me, a reform. We want to replace and reform it. Also, we have 14 of 17 counties as of January 1st was going to have no health care insurance, private insurance at all.
Worse now that Anthem bailed out.
Correct. Now, it looks like we're going to get another carrier that's going to come in, and we've been working with the governor's office and trying to move this forward. So hopefully we're going to have a replacement by January 1st. But there's been a lot of difference since 2015, and frankly, system has been upended since 2015. 14 of 17 counties without insurance, and the fact that we have a couple 100,000 more people on Medicaid, it just didn't make any sense to disrupt what we have going because we can replace it. Yeah. Let's replace this. And as you know, I had a block grant bill. that at the end of the day probably would have made the most sense. That is, get health care out of Washington, D.C., get it back to the states.
Anything that gets the federal government out of our hair, I'm generally in favor of.
That was the Lindsay Cassidy Heller bill.
Yeah.
Is completely get health care out of Washington, D.C., bring it back to the states, and let the governor and the legislature determine and decide what kind of health care system they want in their state.
Is that pretty much where the governor thought this would go when he agreed to the Medicaid expansion from the beginning?
Well, first of all, he supports that piece of legislation.
Yeah,
by the way,
right.
The president supports that piece of legislation. The more we can get out of Washington, D.C., get it out of that swamp, get it back to the states, let the states decide, that are much closer, obviously.
Yeah.
Think how difficult it is right now for someone to make an argument the fact that they're not being treated fairly by their insurance company. They have to call a congressman. They have to call a United States senator. If we can move this down to the state's level, get these individuals so they can talk to their assemblyman or their state senator or call the governor's office, makes it much more easier for people to get the support and the assistance that they need. So let's get this out of Washington, D.C. Let's get it to the states where it belongs.
One of the complaints a lot of people have had, and I'm one of them, is from the very beginning of the Affordable Care Act, we had to pay the insurance companies. I use the word bribe to get them to play ball. Now it seems like we've got to keep paying them to keep them involved. That's where a lot of people get stuck. It's like the insurance companies were the problem when the Affordable Care Act came along, we were told.
Right. And through the Affordable Care Act, and frankly through the Republican bill, we continue to subsidize the insurance companies.
Yeah.
And this is what we wanted stopped. Myself, Rand Paul, and other conservatives back in Washington, D.C. Why are we going to continue? The Republican replacement bill was Obamacare light. We continue to subsidize the insurance companies here in this country, and to the billions and billions of dollars. So that was the purpose of our legislation. Let's get it out of Washington, D.C. Let's get it to the states. By the way, if you did that here in the state of Nevada, took it out of Washington, D.C. and brought it to the state, just by getting the Washington, D.C. bureaucracy out of it, we would increase spending for health care in the state of Nevada by 49%. That's why the governor supports it. That would seem to
be a pretty good thing.
That's why the president supports it. So it's a good piece of legislation. If we can find that 50th vote, this is what we'll be talking about.
That's the challenge. And you've got to be thinking ahead to 2018, the party in general, about how can we get more than 52 members.
Correct.
And Republicans, so we can actually get some things done.
Well, Dan, no one was more disappointed than myself that we didn't repeal and replace Obamacare than myself. Having worked through this process, at the end of the day, I was with the president when it came to the skinny bill. Now, keep in mind what the skinny bill was. That was eliminated. That eliminated all the mandates.
Yeah.
Do you know we have 90,000 Nevadans that can't afford health care, so they have to pay a fine? 90,000 Americans that can't afford a product that the government tells them they have to buy. So they pay the fine instead. Over $18 million is paid by Nevadans today. There's something inherently wrong with a system that tells you have to buy something. If you can't, then you have to pay this fine. Well, and that's what 90,000 Nevadans were doing. That's why I voted to eliminate all those mandates, both individual, business, and of course eliminated some of the taxes also.
Yeah. But the problem, of course, and I know you know this, is once you eliminate the mandates and nobody has to buy it anymore, the whole premise of Obamacare, which is the healthy people pay for the sick, it implodes at that point, right?
Stop and think about it. That was the heart of Obamacare, was getting rid of the mandates.
Yeah.
If people wanted to eliminate Obamacare, get rid of the mandates. And that's what that vote was to get rid of those mandates.
Got to touch base with you real quick on the horrible events in Charlottesville over the weekend. And anything Trump says, somebody's going to find an issue with it. But regardless of where you fall in on the whole white supremacy side of this, and everybody falls